Welcome to this week's podcast recorded live at IHRSA 2024. In this episode, I was fortunate to connect with two industry legends who traveled to Los Angeles from Australia and agreed to give us a deep dive into the already overused term recovery. As suppliers, consultants and manufacturers race to get involved in what seems to be the fitness industry's next gold rush. Well known and well respected, serving and educating the industry for several decades, they break down the fundamental principles of recovery and share their predictions for how they think the space will evolve. So please welcome Mr. Ian O'Dwyer, co-founder of SOMA, and Richard Boyd, Director of Global Wellness Designs, to this week's podcast. And if you get any value from this episode, please subscribe to our channel and share it with one other person, which will help us to keep creating more content like this. Thanks for listening.
Richard Boyd, Ian O'Dwyer, thank you very much. Glad you made it in the rain.
Yeah, that's the stains in the shirt. It's just rain.
So we're talking about the category recovery, and as with everything in the fitness industry, these terms kind of end up getting overused very, very quickly. And my concern about this space is already it's sort of starting to get there. But I thought, from your perspective, I've known you guys for many, many years, and I know the level and the caliber of the conversations and the quality of the products that you guys deliver. But give us a little bit of background on where you started. What was your sort of entry point into this, and why did you decide to spend some time really figuring out where this whole space is going?
I think that's an interesting one for Richard and I, because we started 25 years ago, and it was a matter of then creating relationships. And we spent a lot of time traveling the world with Richard's former business, PT on the Net. And it was interesting because all along the way, if we listened to what the people were asking for, we could give them some solutions. And what that enabled us to do was then to start to sort of look at areas that other people weren't looking at it, whether it was, various types of tissues in the body, whether it was various types of specific movements in the body, and how that had culminated into performance, but then how we got people to back up 7 days later or 2 days later or whenever it was. And, the term recovery now comes out. Is it recovery or is it priming? Really, when does recovery start? So I guess it's this culmination of relationships, of listening, of wanting to help people be the best them, that has now driven us into this particular area. And, you said it beautifully, the bastardization of a word, whether it's been functional fascial, that's right, fascia or whatever it's been, and now it's recovery. Really what we're trying to do is create solutions for people to be their best them.
Richard, you've been an educator and you've been in the education space. What's that looking like? Because this is also, although someone said to me, well, recovery, they've been doing this with NFL players for many, many years. My feeling is that there's some catching up to do from a traditional perspective in terms of what's being taught to trainers.
Yeah, I think if you go back to prior to, before PT on the Net, we're sort of talking 1997, 1995, the reason why that came about was because the industry was very unstructured. So you had a lot of trainers doing a lot of different things, and there was no real guiding sort of structure behind that. So really what started that whole thing was, I had a client that had HIV, and I was living in Canada and I was working as a trainer, and I had absolutely no idea what to do. And there was no resource that I could go to that could give me any guidance on anything to do with that. And that's what really started that concept. And I feel like recovery is a little bit in that space right now. So recovery's come on the scene. Yes, it's been talked about for a long time in the sporting world, but in terms of coming now into health and clubs and more into the fitness and wellness space, I think it's unstructured like the PT business was. And I think what you see is when you have that unstructured environment, what happens is the suppliers tend to lead the conversation. So it's really it's if a supplier's got a whether it's a sauna or whatever it is, red light therapy, they tend to be the ones leading the discussion, but they're really experts in supplying a product. They're not really experts in the concept of recovery. So I think what's happening now is that we're starting to see that there needs to be some structure placed around that. So it's sort of what you said, everyone jumped on functional training. But the thing that was interesting about functional training is that when that started, and we were sort of probably 10 years into PT on the net then, what we noticed was that everybody that was in the strength world really was very anti-functional training. And it took a very long time. I remember NSCA specifically saying to me, just saying, we don't believe in this. There is no research to back this up. And then eventually it became something where there was more research. People started to use it more. And then and now it's obviously got its place. I would say it's got a stronghold now within the industry. I think recovery is now going to be that, it's sort of being pushed around here and there. I think everyone's a bit unsure about, to your point, they're a bit unsure about where it's going to land. And I think it has to be driven by protocols and research, not by suppliers, just in terms of where it actually lands in terms of how we use it. And to Ian's point, whether it's an emotionally driven relationship side of things, because all of that rolls into recovery as well too, all the way across to whether it's, it's a cold plunge, where do all these things sit? What is the process for that? What's relevant to someone's club versus a hotel versus a, because I mean, think of the amount we've all traveled over the years. I would have paid $100 to, arriving in LA and hadn't had somewhere to do recovery, where I could have moved, had some cold therapy, had some, had a sauna, and had these, red light therapy, let's say. I think that's where it's all heading. But again, I think it's all been, everyone's sort of rushing into it a little bit. And I think everyone just needs to take a really deep breath and just sort of say, okay, well, what is recovery?
No pun intended, like.
Yeah.
Nasal breath.
Yeah, has to be through the nose and you have to tape your mouth. So I think that's where it's at. And I think that makes it very exciting. And that's what I love about it. It's early stages. It's very concept side of things. But I think it also helps to maybe now, because we've seen so many things unstructured before, I think the quicker the structure comes in now, I think it's here to stay. I don't think it's a fad. I think some of the protocols might be fads, but I certainly don't think that the whole concept of, if I'm going to a gym to work out with the fitness side of things, recovery is now a part of that. And I don't think it's going to go away.
How are we defining it? So we use the word recovery, which we said is kind of gets overused. If we assume that we're in this, a lot of people that are probably listening to this are in some form of fitness industry. So whether that's a trainer, a boutique studio, a regular gym, and hotel gyms, etc. So there's locations where this takes place. What are you if you had to put a bunch of words and descriptions underneath that word recovery, what is it? Is it breath work? Is it cold? Is it red light therapy? Is it movement? You mentioned a new word to me, this priming. Like, how would you best and simply describe that for people that are trying to understand, what this means to them?
I think recovery is measured by performance, whether your performance is as a corporate, as a mum and dad, whether it's as a sports person, because at the end of the day, coming from a horsing background, if we trained humans the way we trained horses, humans would have a much greater sustainability and longevity, because we look at the horse's response to the forces and pressure that we place upon it. And then we apply simple things like sunshine, green grass, space to move, happy environment. So, we've got all these tools, Matt, and these tools are incredibly powerful, and there's research around them all. But there's one thing that is missing across the whole lot, is that why do we put all these tools in silos? We have breath work, we have mobility work, we have stability work, we have vibration, percussion, compression. Where do we bring this all together? It's like saying, okay, I'm going to work on your emotional side, and then I'm going to work on your mental side, your physical and your spiritual. But at the end of the day, we have a heart that's 8 times electromagnetically stronger than your brain. So shouldn't emotion be part of your mental? And then you've got a gut that has 100 million neurons, which has 10 times the ascending pathways to the brain than the brain has to the gut. So shouldn't we be incorporating some sort of gut feeling, some sort of breath work into that as well? And just imagine if we all treated each other better. Let's call that spirituality. How would that make people feel? How would you feel? So it's interesting, because for me, recovery is incorporating everything from sleep to food to mood to the ability to be able to move in a way in which you enjoy it. I'm an semi-professional sports person who spent 20 years in cold water. Do you think I want to go back into ice? No, because there's a visceral response there. Because we used to sit in it for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, Matt, and it wasn't pleasant, right? And we now know that probably inhibited the healing process, didn't help it. Understanding what the body's made up, fluid of, and how we could actually fast track the healing. So, if you were going to talk to me about getting recovery, I would probably say, well, one of my favorite things is whole body vibration, infrared saunas, red light, fascial mobility. Oh, okay. What do they all have in common? Fluid. So it's just interesting, Matt, because once again, we put it into it. Is it a neural recovery? Is it a muscular recovery? Is it a fascial? No. It's a tissue recovery. Nerve, muscle, bone, fascia, skin, 70% water, bone, 30% water. And then you've got blood, 92% water. And then you've got lymph, 96% water. And in those last two, there's 20 litres of that stuff, up to 20 litres of that stuff in our body. If we don't get fluid to flow, blood to flow, lymph to flow, you can't heal. Now, that's just a common sense perspective. That's not, and I can show you the research behind it, but it's just common sense, right? But Matt, once upon a time when we shook a man's hand or shook a person's hand, not a man's hand, but a person's hand, that meant something because it was common sense. There was a feeling there. We trusted them. So for me, recovery is actually applying a modality to someone, listening to their response verbally, and then listening to their response emotionally, mentally, physically, as to how they enjoyed that modality. Was it a positive aspect? Was it a negative? If it was negative, we won't go back there again. If it was positive, let's do it again.
This movement of fluid then, is that, because I tried to simplify things down to make it easier for me to understand. And last night we chatted and you were talking about this fluid thing. Is that, if you had to sort of have this 80-20 and like, let's focus on the 20% of things that have the biggest impact, does this movement of fluid, is that one of those sort of big rocks that you're thinking about and focusing on?
Yeah, and Matt, we've spent 25 years working with some of the best in the world. And, and Matt, you've experienced it, these people, and, they can talk to you about the neural response. They can talk to you about the mechanical, biomechanical response. They can talk to you about the fascial response. But at the end of the day, if we look at the body, inclusively, not exclusively, not putting it into silos, but inclusively. And if we take something like, a tensegrity model, which is a model with sticks and bands, and the sticks don't touch each other, and you see lots of bridges that are tensegrity models. And if we talk about basically a tensegrity model or a hydraulic ram, and a hydraulic ram that's full of gas, and when you apply force to the gas compresses and it supports the ram. So it keeps whatever the ram's supporting in position. All we are is a biological hydraulic ram. You push on my chest, the opposite side of my chest is going to have a response, but so is my hips, so is my knees, so is my foot. So if that fluid flows to have even tension throughout our whole body, tissue doesn't break. But if I have somewhere that the fluid doesn't flow, ankle, particularly ankle, knee, pelvis, or shoulder ring, and if it doesn't flow through those areas, normally something will happen to the back. Normally something will happen to the knee. Normally something will happen to the shoulder or the neck. So it's kind of interesting because if we we looked at the ankle complex and we tapped it, it's pretty bony. And then we go to the calf, pretty meaty. And then we go to the knee, pretty bony. And then we go to the hamstring, quad, pretty meaty. We go to the pelvis, it's actually pretty bony. And then we come to the viscera, which is the gut, which is 70% of your lymph. There's 96% fluid, which is meaty. And then we come to the sternum, lateral sternum, the lateral rib cage. It's bony. If that was a river from bottom to top, and if the river in the narrow spots, the bony spots, had a tree fall in, what would happen to the fluid flow? Because fluid has to flow, 20 litres of it from your foot to your clavicles, because that's your lymphatic ducts. Now, go to any anatomy book. The lymphatic ducts haven't changed from day one, and the lymphatic nodes haven't changed from day one. Yet, because we become exclusive of how we look at recovery, we don't look at the understanding of we produce a stress in the body, and stress is a good thing. We need stress. We produce a stress. We produce a waste product. Well, if that waste product can't come out, if we can't excrete it, If it can't get to the lymphatic ducts, it doesn't go back behind the heart into the organs to be excreted. We store it. We store it as inflammation or as toxicity. What creates disease? Inflammation or toxicity. So it's kind of interesting because you listen to all the leading experts that are telling us we've got to decrease inflammation in the body. Well, if we can make sure that we move intelligently, that we eat intelligently, that we surround ourselves in happy environments, like look at last night. I mean, I didn't know half those people, but the people I did, it was just like a reunion, right? How good was it, right?
Well, there was too many Australians for one.
There was too many Australians. But the sense of joy. Now, you and I and Richard both know we don't get much of a chance in past times to have that sense of joy because we're normally on the road, having to see suppliers, having to do the education, whatever it may be, right? But to get paid back last night just by catching up and chin wagging and having a glass of wine or a conversation, that was amazing. That is recovery. That's a healing process. So it's not that it's any different to what it never ever has been. Matt, like we brought play to the States in 2006. Why would I? And people said to me, but OD, why would you bring play? Well, to be quite honest, I got bored as anything going to the gym. And every time I went to the gym and I did traditional stuff, my body hated it because my sport was multi-directional. But as soon as I made it game-based and it mimicked three-dimensional motion like my sport was, guess what? I enjoyed this game, the tissues enjoyed it, my performance went up, my recovery went up. It was just ridiculous, right? So we talk about fluid. You know, people who are stressed normally have a fluid retention.
What is that because muscles are tightening up and preventing the flow of the fluids?
Let's go back to one thing. People who are stressed normally don't breathe. Right? If I've got a tongue that's connected to my throat muscle, my hyoid and my temple that runs around my heart and lung, which connects to my diaphragm, pelvic floor, and then runs to my toe, if that's the deep front core line, which we know through cadavers now, we know that's all connected through one line of tissue. If I can't breathe into my belly, diaphragmatically breathe, if I can't get my toe to connect to my pelvis because I'm conditioning my body to do, let's call it a squat that doesn't allow my toes to stay down because I push into my heels, I'm not breathing. I'm not using my breath to create tension to help fluid flow. I'm activating muscles in a potential non-sequential manner for success. So if I'm breathing in through my throat, I'm creating toxicity. So and this is all, once again, this is all scientifically proven. This isn't stuff we've just made up. All we've done is put it together.
And I think, Matt, to answer your question too, I think the lens and to simplify that message. So listening to that, it's intriguing, right? And there's a lot of complexity to that, but really the underlying message of moving fluid, when you look at all the protocols in recovery, we just use that now as our lens. So when we look at, we're agnostic to every supplier. So we think everyone's doing a great job and they've got great products, but our lens is how efficiently does say for instance, a cryo machine, how efficiently does that move fluid? And if it doesn't, then it's not going to rate very highly for us. And then, so when we come to advise and design things, we're designing and advise them really with that lens of looking at that. And also too, Mark Verstegen had a really great way of explaining it. And he produced so many top level athletes and was renowned for being one of the best at it, because his concept was work plus work equals stress or fatigue. And then work plus recovery equals performance. And so we sort of took that and said, okay, in this, because he did that about almost 20 years ago. If you look at it now, we sort of say stress plus stress equals fatigue. Okay, well, what is stress? Well, stress is your family, COVID. It's and everyone forgets it's working out because it's a big stressor on the body. And a lot of times, if you talk to Greg Roscoff, he'll say one of the worst stresses for the body is exercise. So there's all sorts of different, obviously, levels of that too, and tolerances. And so for us, it's, stress is basically life. And you can load that up to Ian's point, and the body will tolerate stress, and it's called eustress, and it's very, very healthy, and it gives us that resilience. But as soon as you have too much of that without recovery, then it leads into all sorts of hormone issues, and then you get fatigue, and then you have a lack of performance, and that performance can be anything. It can be going to work and just having energy to be at work the whole day without having to down 5 coffees. So, and then when we say stress plus recovery equals performance on our side of it, the performance then again is related around all of those things within life. And I think if you have those two lenses of moving fluid and understanding that you need to have recovery in there somewhere, really what we're saying is you don't have to now change and get rid of fitness, or because sometimes we tend to jump, as you know, from one thing to the next. It's just integrated into it. And even part of that is, with the priming concept, is you could do mobility, stability, and whole body vibration, and you could even have that now next to a treadmill. You can have it next to your functional space. We talked about that. You can have it next to your strength line. And if I start by doing that before I do everything else, I'm getting all the fluid moving. So if I can get the fluid moving, I'm going to have a better output or outcome when I go and do my strength or my cardio or my function, or all together. And so again, priming, it's, that's where I think people will start to get confused. It is recovery, but it's also done at the start. And I think our friend Rob described really, really well that the industry is really good at doing the middle piece, which is the cardio. So we've got great cardio stuff, we've got great strength stuff, we've got great functional spaces, Group X, but we're not really good at the front end, which is the priming or the warm up, and we don't really have much on the recovery side. So I think it's really just filling in those two gaps, and keeping the lens pretty simple. And Ian really created that lens for us to say, he's been working on people for so many years. He really said the only way he gets a response is to get that fluid moving through the tissue. And then when we started to look at that, and then started to look at the research on cold therapy, started to look at the research on red light, started to look at the research on sauna. When you then start to break all of it down, you really start to see how each one of those affects fluid flow. So ultimately, rather than getting around the whole supplier side of here's the latest trend around that, ours becomes much simpler. We just say, okay, well, explain to us how that moves the fluid through the tissues. And to Ian's point, it's hard and soft tissue. So we're not just focusing on muscles. So when we do our designs around, say for instance, percussion, we'll use percussion on the bone.
A softer, smaller tool, because we now know the importance of bone. We know that if we stimulate the bone because of the mechanoreceptors in fascia, it's interesting because they're just the mechanoreceptor is just basically something that you feel, right? It responds to some sort of action. So we look at the various types of receptors, and there's one particular receptor it's the most abundant mechanoreceptor in the body. It's inside bone and it's outside bone. And what's it produce? Vasodilation, same as nasal breathing. Now, just imagine if I stimulate the bony structure, just happens to be my sternum, which just happens to allow me to open the front of my chest, which allows my head to go backwards and be in a better position, which allows better blood flow, which means better decision making, better self-esteem. Just imagine how that would help someone leaving your recovery center. They want to come back. So it's that whole thing, Matt, about realistically, eustress, distress. Stress is in our world every day. I need to try and get as much eustress as I can, because distress is going to break tissue down. It's going to change mental capacity. And it's just a matter of, okay, we're not saying that a neural response is a poor choice or a mechanical response is a poor choice, because we know we need both movement patterns and the neural system. But we've also got to understand, if we're talking a neural response, well, the nerves are 70% water. What encases the nerves? Fascia. What's fascia? 70% water. Fascia is actually 3 times faster to the brain than what the nervous system is. 250 million neurons in the body. 250. 50 million are in muscle. 200 are in fascia. So, this is, as I said, this isn't stuff we're making up. This is stuff, if we just stand back and change the view, change the lens just a little bit, it's like, wow, okay. This is kind of cool, because all I know, Matt, is that for 25 years, especially the last 15, I've had brain injuries. I had a client who lost half his frontal lobe, 6 compression fractures in his spine. He came to me because he didn't want his right hip, which needed replaced, and his left hip had been done 16 years ago. And it's interesting because his mental capacity now, and he was an incredibly intelligent person, his mental capacity is, I think, as sharp as it's ever been. His movement through the roof. He's just had his hip replaced at 80 years of age. But he's done it so easily. And he was quite kyphotic because of the compression fractures. As soon as he got the new hip in, because of the way we conditioned his body, using whole body vibration and mobility and stability and, the various types of things, percussion, and going to the bony sections, he almost stood up straight. And you sort of think, wow, at 80, we're told that's not possible. Well, trust me, learning disabilities, body position, some people might call it posture, performance in athletics, mums and dads, relationships, going into the corporate room and making a decision, right? They're all important things that we have every day.
Is this, in terms of the opportunity, and I'm sure you guys have thought about this, but it sounds like, it reminds me of a conversation I had with Michelle, who we all connected with. And he said sometimes he's had clients that come to him and they want to get in shape and work out, etc. But he puts them on a program of actually recovery. I can't remember like working in for a period of time, because he said, in some cases they just need to get their cells back to basics before they add any more stress onto their bodies. And then once they're in that position, then he can start working out. And listening to the conversation with you guys, it almost makes me think there's this sort of this I don't know, like something that's separate to necessarily working out or going to the gym, but it sounds in some ways it's probably less painful than having a HIIT workout. But it sounds like if you can't get into the gym and do a workout 2 or 3 times a week, maybe what you actually do need to do is to come in and whether you call it recovery or whatever, but you breathe, you move some fluids, and you sort of get yourself into a good mental state and physical state. And then once you've done that, you're probably in a better position to actually want to work out. Because I've just come back from a long trip. I was in London for a week, Saudi, back to London, back to LA. And for a few days, I was just in a total mess. And I went to the gym because it's just like my way of releasing. But I kind of felt probably wasn't the right thing to do because I was already...
You're already depleted, right? Yeah.
But I also didn't know what to do either, and maybe coming to you would have probably been that thing. So I'm just thinking in terms of the opportunity for the industry, is this creating packages and spaces and businesses where you get people in just purely to do that as part of a broader health and wellness protocol in some ways?
Yeah, really good question. I think how it's going to evolve or what we've already seen now is you've got these dedicated spaces now that are separate to a health club, and they're everywhere now, and especially in Australia now, just between where I live and Brisbane, there's 23 dedicated recovery places, and we're talking a very small population. And so it is definitely something it's there, it's big. Some of these places are spending between $50 and $100 million to build these. One of them is just monstrous. And I think that's going to be there for a while. I think what's going to happen is I think we'll start to see those probably evolve and sort of shift a little bit, because I think people are going to have to make a choice. And that's what I was saying to the health clubs probably about 18 months ago. I was just trying to give a little bit of a warning flag to say, you're going to be under pressure from these independent models, because the gym is going to probably be pushed and forced into recovery, because you need to make a choice. Do you want to lose? Because the choice will be, do I pay to go to both? And my thing would be, if you're wealthy, great. But if you're not, you're either going to probably go for a run outside and maybe do your gym workout post-COVID now, and then probably go to a recovery place and maybe pay your $50 a week to go there, rather than have a gym membership and have a separate recovery membership. There's obviously people doing that, but I think overall, people will start to make choices. And I think if a club is going to do it, my recommendation would be not to rush into it, because I think if we rush into it, we're going to end up with things that just don't fit the environment. They don't suit the architecture. It's not going to look nice. There'll be no programming with it. And the models I've seen where they've done that have not worked. So they were trying to add them in and then either do a premium-based model off of that, or find a way to have a revenue model for it. And they really just couldn't get people to want to either pay extra for it, and then they just had to add it into the package. But what I found that most of it was it just didn't look very nice, because there just wasn't a lot of structure behind it. Again, going back to that. So I think what we'll see is we'll start to see a lot of the health clubs and hotels especially in places like Saudi, where they're really pushing down this wellness space. I think we're going to see all that start to evolve within those spaces too. And I think, I'm the biggest fan of, unlike him, I'm the biggest fan of, I'm a very, very, very big believer in cold therapy, and just because of the hormonal response and what it does to me personally. And I find, jet lag and all those types of things, it's just a really great tool. And I really find it decreases the inflammation and really just sort of resets that your nervous system. I think where clubs are going with that, though, I don't think there's a good enough, viable enough commercial solution around cold therapy just yet. Like, I think the plunge guys have done such an amazing job. That tool is so beautiful, but that's, to me, is what sits in your home. And I think commercially, they're going to have to find a solution, because you either have to go into a really, really big tub, and it's going to cost you a lot of money, and that now you've got plumbing and you've got all sorts of different, laws and things, regulations behind that. It's chlorine, and you have to start treating it like a swimming pool. That's the only way to really solve the dynamics of having a cold solution problem. Because when you go smaller, there's a lot of different problems, and a lot of it is heat exchange. So if we're trying to keep it under 15 degrees Celsius for all the people that don't live in America, once someone goes in, it adds 2 degrees. So when you have 2 people in, now it's 4 degrees. So a third person goes in, now it's 6 degrees. So once you've had 5 people through within half an hour, you've increased it 10 degrees, and it's very hard to get it back down to temp. And there's a couple of solutions there where they're trying to move the water more, but I just don't think they're ready for that. So I think the starting point and sort of where we've sort of evolved our design is really around starting with what we call dry recovery, because I think it makes more sense in a club format to have it as part of the actual club design.
And you're not into, I remember you saying like cryo, you're sort of not too sort of
Look, there's research there, but once again, if we talk a dry setting, so let's just say you've got a hotel, let's just say you've got a gym, the cost of plumbing, the cost of trying to create a wet area, it's extensive. So
yeah, and I think this will be a bit controversial, Matt. So thanks for throwing me into that. But I think if you follow the science, so the science is saying that you've got these glabrous parts of the body, so it's the palms of your hands, the bottom of your feet, and the top part of the face, and that's where your body will have that heat exchange. So if you're getting into cold therapy, the thing about getting into a tub is that those areas are immersed, and so they instantly get cold, and that cold goes straight through to the cells. And the thing with cryotherapy, where I would challenge some people on the thinking around that, is that you cover those areas up. So you cover up your hands, you cover up your feet, and you wear a thing around the top of your face. So the question for me then would be is, if that's where the exchange is happening, and if you couldn't normally get into minus 160 degree temperatures, I don't think it's probably going to be as effective as getting into a cold plunge. So again, moving fluid, if you took the gloves, the booties off, and you could survive in their environment, I think you'd get a really good response. But because you're covering those up, I think, and that is the fastest transport to get the cold into the body, I think you then have to look at, okay, well, how effective is that really for our lens of moving fluid? Whereas cold, we know you get that instant, the blood is shunting straight away from the external straight towards the organs, because it's thinking that it's trying to protect your body basically. So you've got a massive amount of fluid exchanging in and out, and once you get out, it sort of works its way back out again. So there's a lot of exchange with fluid when you're doing that. And so I think, again, it really depends on, I don't think there's any good or bad. It just, with our lens, it's how much does it move the fluid, because we want the people to get a really good, we want it to work so that they come back again.
So what have you found is, if you had to have the top 3 in terms of moving fluid, what are those big ones for you guys then?
That'd be an OD question.
So for me, movement's everything. Mobility's everything. So once again, moving people within their threshold. So you made a perfect example. You've covered an immense amount of miles in a plane at altitude, so your body's inflamed. I need the feet to move because I've got to pump. I need to pump that lymphatic system because there's reflux valves from your feet to your clavicles that I need to keep moving. Fascia loves vector variation, loves variety, loves variables. It just wants to move differently all the time. And it's kind of interesting because we make our athletes bigger, stronger, faster, these big motors, these big muscles, which are amazing. But you take a 454 Chev that we're building these athletes into, and you put them in a mini minor, a tiny car, because you are governed by what the chassis is. Well, the chassis is the fascia or the collagen. So if I'm not conditioning my chassis to be able to cope with stress in different directions, I'm going to break.
And I'm just on that for, if anyone's listening, when I've never heard it explained like that, like the fascia likes moving in different directions. What is an example of how you would move your fascia in different directions?
Okay, so for instance, we go and do a lifting session. Now, traditionally, what we would do is we would instruct people to push their heels into the floor. Don't let your knees drive forward, let your butt drive back. So you go, okay, wow, you're going to make a big butt, good strong glute max, right? You're going to get some good hamstrings and activation in there. But the problem you've got is, in motion, the pelvis has to flare. The pelvis has to open three-dimensionally. If it doesn't, now I haven't got the ability to negatively or positively accelerate and change direction safely. So I would want someone maybe to do some lateral stepping, maybe to change my foot position, maybe turn my feet in, maybe turn my feet out, maybe stagger my feet. There's 69 different foot positions in a squat pattern. Why do we only use one? So it's about feeding the body intelligence, right? So the more I condition the fascia to move differently, the more it now adapts. Davis's law, if I change the line and direction of force, I can manipulate the tissue in a positive or a negative manner. That's 1867. That's not 2021. Yet we have, for some reason, taken the animal and said, okay, we're going to load the muscle, make the muscle strong because that's what's going to give us performance. So for me, if I was going to create a top three, I would certainly have fascial mobility, not neuromuscular, fascial mobility, and understanding the roles of fascia. Fascia is a force mitigator. It loves to share stress. It doesn't want to take on stress, otherwise it'll break. So fascial mobility is a low speed, low force motion that resets the tissues. So you talked before about, would I be better off going to a gym or maybe going to let's call it a recovery center? You're better off going to somewhere where I can reset the tissues, because every time I do exercise, I blow the fuse. I've got to reset the fuse, get my sequencing, get my fluid response, get my movement pattern response, what we call our mechanical response. The second thing I would want to do now is I would want to stimulate the bony structures. Now, that's up to you. From a perspective of SOMA, we've created self-osteofascial engagement. All that means, really big words, self, you, osteofascial, osteo, bone, fascial, bone surrounds fascia, and engagement. We're just engaging the tissue. There's no research in the world that says we can release tissue, right? So all we're doing is we're taking a roller, taking my hands, taking percussion, taking something now that stimulates the bony structures. Why? Because there's a mechanoreceptor, the most abundant in the body, inside bone and outside the bone in periosteum. So if I stimulate that, it creates vasodilation. Well, that's pretty important, right? Vasodilation is a relaxation of the walls of the blood vessels, increases blood flow, increases oxygen, increases nutrients, grabs the waste products, decreases blood pressure, resets the autonomic nervous system, takes me from a sympathetic back into a parasympathetic. So that's a pretty powerful tool, right? So I could use a roller, I could use a ball, I could use someone going to get a body work session who actually changes the tension in the fascial system. And for me, my biggest one is whole body vibration, because whole body vibration automatically stimulates the tissues in different directions, different heights, distances, and directions. It creates, and I can adjust the amount of force to increase bone density. If we listen to Wolff's law, which is about bone density, and Davis's law, which is about tissue, now I'm getting a big bang for my buck because I'm starting to change all of the tissues in one simple manner, providing I understand what the tissue's roles are. And that's where I feel we've probably let the industry down over the years, purely by trying to make silos. If we now put those silos together, make it a more inclusive approach, and knowing that everything affects everything, like it's just to be a bit of a nerd for a minute. Back at the embryological stage, vibration starts with a heartbeat. So about the 9th day, the mother's heartbeat comes through the fascia. So that's a sense of vibration, right? we used to think that the nerves grew, that the fascia grew over the nerves. No, the fascia grows nerves first, and then the nerves fill the fascia. So it's kind of interesting, Matt. Now, if we are inclusive with what we do, it's really exciting, because now we're getting an opportunity for people not to break down. I did some conditioning with a football club, 2011, 2012. Aussie rules, 60 players. We didn't have a soft tissue in 2 years. We had no strained calves, no strained hamstrings, no adductors, no soft tissue injuries at all. Those players, I wasn't the magician. Those players were empowered to use rollers in a certain manner, do mobilizers in a certain manner. We added drills, which look like play, in a certain manner. We trained for a certain time every night, no longer than 68 minutes. And there's a reason for that.
What's the reason?
Because you have to engage people. You have to create an intensity for the people to want to be involved in that sport for that time. And if you break it down into segments, you can have now people, because it's, who wants to be yelled at? Train harder, do this, And we didn't want players training at maximum. We wanted players training in what we termed gear 3, 70 to 80%. Now, if I have a player who's training for an 8-minute segment at intensity at 70 to 80%, do you think he's going to stay there? No, he's not. He'll creep into gear 4, 80 to 90%. Now, we know that if I'm at 80 to 90%, I need 48 to 72 hours to recover. Otherwise, I'm depleting my tissue. So, and we had heart rate monitors. We had everything on players gathering the information, because the biggest thing that we've always had is, if I'm a horse trainer, and I don't know too many horse trainers who have degrees, yet they have millions and millions and millions of dollars worth of horse flesh. But if I have a horse trainer and I ask them, why would you do that with a horse? They would typically say, well, this is what I observed with that horse. That horse doesn't like other horses. That horse doesn't like being in a box. That horse, he doesn't like eating grass from the ground. He wants it, because they watch the animal, right? And the biggest thing, if I say to people all the time, when someone comes into your gym, what's the first thing you see? And they look at me stupidly, like it's their skin, right? Someone's skin. If you're dehydrated, what's the skin going to look like? If you haven't had sleep, what's the skin going to look like? Same, when I walk into a horse's box, the first thing you see is the skin. Have they sweated? Are they dehydrated? Do they feel relaxed? Is their coat nice and shiny? Is this person happy? Is this horse happy? So it's kind of funny, right? They're things that when we look at creating performance, opportune wellness, whatever the term may be, recovery is just a word. There's some pretty simple things we can do. And Matt, we've just got to step back. I love it with what Richard says. Step back. Don't get too excited about what's going on. Understand that we've got 7 different tissues in the body: nerve, muscle, bone, fascia, skin, blood. They're all incorporated. We can't separate them. And if we incorporate them in an intelligent manner, if we give them good food, if they get good sleep, if we create some happiness and joy, and we get some good movement, we're ticking all the boxes.
How are you getting this out? It sounds like a great philosophy, but we've really skimmed across a lot of huge amount of information here. How are you going to get this in the hands of the people that are going to be responsible for delivering this in a way where it's going to make a difference, and it's not going to get watered down, and it's you're not going to get bad rap from kind of half doing it, and which in some cases kind of happens a lot in the industry.
It does happen a lot, Matt. It does.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. The way that we've done our designs, and obviously why we're here at IHRSA is to we're working with a company, Indigo, in the UK, and looking at they've taken our designs and then we've integrated them into what we're calling a floor model, and then we also created a recovery bench. And the two things with both of those different options is, if somebody wants to do recovery, what we've decided to do is everything for us is going to have a digital interface. And the reason being, I mean, you've done it with your, I mean, you're probably one of the first to do it with equipment a very long time ago, especially when it came to dumbbell racks and all that side of it. I think just guiding them through that, so that if they come and they can just click on I've got tight calves, and it gives them a couple of options. It's a video, plays the video, and shows them how to use it, whether they're in mobility, stability, vibration, percussion, whatever pod they're in or module, which we call them. Then it just basically walks them through that process. And what we've found, talking back to Michal, when Michal invented the Viper, I remember that he had about 1,200 exercises.
12,000. Yeah, he had 12,000. And it was like, how are we going to deliver 12,000 exercises? And Michal, in his brilliance, said, we're going to deliver 12.
Yeah. And so he's just stuck with those 12. And really, the trainers are now very comfortable with those 12. People know how to use those 12. And when you look at the NBA now and they're all warming up using Viper, they're using a lot of the same simple ones. And so that's going to be our approach to this, is that we're not going to give you 50 different options for your calves, and because people don't really need that. They really just need to be able to move fluid. So if we can just give them some simple things for the body part that they're after, or give them a program, whether it's an energy program, I want more energy, or it's, or I want a recovery program from my sport, or whatever it is, they can choose that. And as they go through each module, it will just show them how to do it. And I think in terms of having to put we like to, it's a Scott Hobson term, one of our old PTA Global directors, and he says you put the smarts under the table. So really the smarts are in the design, and really for the user interface, it's just step up, click the video, follow it, and away you go. And that's going to give you fluid movement.
And so in a way, you're going directly to the user of this.
Perfect. Because how many years have we gone the other way? We've tried to educate the trainer, the coach, the allied health professional. Yet now, the person who comes to me is more educated than most people in the industry, because they go and they Google things. They go and research things. So now let's create the experience, not the knowledge. Someone comes in with back pain. I want you to do this, do this, do this. How does it feel? Has it been a positive? Tick, continue. If it hasn't, let's change it. So it's that whole experience now, which is the common sense thing, right? If we can get back to connecting people to themselves and being able to do something and then go, actually, I like that. Let's do it again.
And I think in our industry, as you know, Matt, when you introduce, because you've always been on the cutting edge of things too, when you introduce something that's really new as a concept, sometimes I remember when free motion, invented the free motion cable cross, right? Nobody went near that thing because they just didn't know what to do with it, and they just didn't quite know, where do I set the cables and what should I do with it, and what's the load, and I think it's got to be a process where we just keep it really, really simple. And the way that we've designed the pods is like any weight cage. So basically, it looks like something that you'd already see in any club traditionally. So we wanted it to be familiar. So the moment they walk in, they're like, yep, I get that. Yeah, that's just a bunch of things in lifting frames that are all together. And we call them modules, but it's really just a bunch of those 1.8 meter wide frames all attached. And then you've got your flat screen, and then you've got your little heading telling you what category you're in, mobility, stability. And I think what will happen is, because it's integrated on the floor, because they're familiar with it, and because there is the flat screen, and they won't be embarrassed. For instance, on our version that we do for the whole body vibration, Ian's idea was to raise the floor up to the plate, and then at the very front of the plate, it drops down. So you can do flushing movements. You can now lay across the plate and actually do a whole bunch of different areas, which you couldn't do before. Because if you've
I used to use one of our benches.
Yeah,
and sort of
that's right.
To it and that.
Yeah, which is traditionally how Ian used it for over a decade. Is you'd have to put a bench there, and so what we've designed is just building all that into the module itself, and then you've got different grip positions, and then you've got the option on the front to basically lay in your back and then flush the calves, and so it's all about, really, again, there's a lot of smarts behind that, but the user's just going to see, lay down on your side, put the plate here, press go, and away you go. And I think that's the way to do it. And in return, in terms of the recovery bench, I think for me it was going into all these clubs and looking at all the different solutions that people have been using, and it was just really ugly. Like, there was stuff everywhere, and you'd have the Normatec boots laying over here, and the guns and the rollers, and there was it just. I think it made some of these beautiful places like Third Space and all these places which have built these beautiful, beautiful locations, and then possibly not having a recovery solution that matches the architecture and all that side of it. And so I think that's really important. So for us to create the recovery bench is there a place where you can store the bench, you can clean it so that, because there's lots of people using these that are sweating into these. How do we kill the bacteria in between users? And then can we do percussion on there? And so to Ian's point, we do bone with one of the guns, and then the other gun you can do tissue. We've got a version where they're little pods under red light. So I think that's sort of the future of where that goes. It sits in the gym, it's on the floor, it's integrated, and and I can use part of it if I want to do my priming and my warm up, and then I can come back and then use the rest if I want to do my recovery. And I think that's the way you introduce it. And I think we keep it really, really simple, because then I think otherwise people they're going to be afraid of it. It's not going to get used, and then I think we miss the benefit of really helping people move this fluid around, which is going to give us that recovery response.
So if anyone wants to find out more about this, have you got a website or anywhere that people can go to see more?
Well, you've got SOMA is my website where they can access programs and so forth. So it's really simple, feelsoma.com. So everything's there if people want to go and purchase programs, mobility programs, various programs for various locations. But they can contact us either ian@feelsoma.com.
Yeah, or it's just richdboydie@gmail.com.
Right.
And on our side of it, Matt, our business that we do together is Global Design Solutions, and they can just get us on LinkedIn for that. And I really think what I would really encourage everyone to do is we're very happy to give free advice. So I'd love for people to reach out and just to ask questions. I've got this much space. What would you recommend? Or or we're looking at this. What do you think? And especially things like racquetball, pickleball, anywhere we've got, squash, tennis. I shouldn't say squash, that's old. Okay, tennis courts, pickleball,
golf.
Yeah, all those areas. I think that's where they should start to think about recovery too, because it doesn't just have to fit in that traditional on the gym floor, which I think that's where it's going to start. But I think ultimately, wouldn't it be great if you could do your mobility, stability, and your whole body vibration, then go play tennis, or then go play pickleball. And I think that's going to reduce a lot of injuries as well too. And it's going to help people get primed and ready for that. And then they can also use that as the recovery mode too.
So for anyone who's listening to audio only, tomorrow, and this will probably be in the past by the time it comes out, but I'm trying to get my head around the dates. But we're going to come to the booth. You've got a booth at IHRSA, and we're going to be there Friday. We'll be getting some videos of what you guys are doing with these new units. So for anyone who's interested in seeing that, they go to the Escape YouTube channel and check it out there. And we'll also put your links and everything in the website and on the emails that go out as well. I think it's an exciting space, and love to probably catch up again later once you guys have sort of, maybe towards the end of the year, and just see how the whole thing's evolved. And I'd love to have one of these near where I go, someone like you who can.
Yeah. But hey, I would love to have someone like me too, Matt. That's the hardest part, right?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Great to see you, mate. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Matty. Thank you. Thanks.